you'll find that other pieces just start falling into place. It's like magic, because language is patterns.
Yeah, it's a very good point that you made.
Like getting like the root of those patterns is the big hurdle. And for myself, I'm able to admit that I think a classroom is probably the best place for me to get that kind of information. But once I have it, like, I just want to be let free, because finding those patterns in the language will be most enjoyable when you're looking for them in the context of something that you like to do. Like, for example, say you have learned how to conjugate your verbs in French. Maybe start by watching some cooking videos of a French chef doing demonstrations where you can see the action happening as they're saying it, you know? And then things like that, where you're definitely not in a classroom. And even if you're not in a culture or a society where you can practice that language all the time, just building it with those little tools and resources that sort of surround what you are interested in will help, I think, keep your attention at the very least. And what's really great about Latin-based languages is that once you speak one, whether it's Spanish, French, or Italian, then you'll see patterns in all of those other languages that are going to click so much faster.
Sure.
And your skills will just keep growing.
Yeah, it's a very good point that you make. I would suggest to any adult student who's going to learn a second language for the first time that look out for patterns in the language. And if I had no exposure to that idea in the past, I might wonder, what do you mean when you say patterns? But even English, even your native language, has patterns. And, you know, of course, we know them intuitively, but we don't visualize them explicitly.
Mm-hmm.
But most people in their native language, when they hear somebody speaking, they can tell somebody, no, you did not say that correctly. You have to say it this way or that way. But pattern recognition, once you understand that you're looking for patterns, you identify them much more quickly.
And then, like, once you have your patterns, then you realize that there's always an exception to every rule. And
yeah, but that, you know, I would say that learning patterns is a good argument in favor of learning exceptions too. You know, I can imagine somebody arguing that, well, you know, you can say all you want about patterns, but there's always these exceptions. But the thing is that once you understand the pattern, you can more easily recognize the exception, isolate it, and learn it how it should be learned, rather than being overwhelmed by the idea that, no, it's just all random.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Like, for example, there's, so in French, you use the verb avoir, to have, to conjugate most tenses. But then there are exceptions to that rule where you use the verb être, to be, to conjugate. And it's only for 12 verbs in the entire language. But they're verbs that you encounter a lot.
Yeah.
And no matter how long I've been speaking French, I learned in a classroom from a teacher a song to remember what these verbs are. And still, when I'm speaking, there's like a flat, like I cycle through that song to still get the word out conjugated properly. And I feel like if I hadn't been taught that a long time ago, like, putting those exceptions to the rules together would have taken a lot longer. And I think that the benefit of an educator who's, you know, a professional in teaching that language is being able to give you that tool to just cut out the bullshit, which it could take a lot longer.
Yeah, there's a lot of those little things that can be catchy and stick with somebody's mind, especially from when they're a kid, you know, those little songs and whatnot. I even remember being an adult. You'll meet a lot of adults that will spell things wrong in English. You know, a famous one is like receive, and they'll spell it R-E-C-I-E-V-E. It almost even looks right too, you know, except that it's not. So, you know, Mitch will say, don't you remember that song in school? I before E, except after C. Always remember that. That's not how you spell receive.
Yeah.
Always remember those little details. I don't remember hearing any of those kinds of songs about Spanish when I was learning as an adult, but I do remember recognizing on my own about the patterns. The beginning of learning Spanish was very slow for about 6 months because it just wasn't clicking to me that languages work in a particular way. But when I started the one-on-one class, she said, you're not conjugating your verbs, Shane. Go out and get this book. It's called 501 Verbs. It's like this just big ass book. And all it is just pages of conjugation tables. And, you know, when you open it, it's just nauseating to look at because there's no explanation of what any of it is. It's just tables and tables, 500 verbs and conjugation tables for each one of them. And you're like, my goodness.
It's anxiety inducing.
Yeah. In the first week that I had the book, I would sit down and eat, and I would just flip through the pages and look at it, and I would start to notice that every page I turned, there were similarities in the tables. You could just see the same similarities, same. You don't know what they mean. You don't know what you're looking
Right.
at necessarily. You don't know what each one of these little categories is actually saying. You're fascinated by, how can there be 36 different versions of this one freaking word? So when I went back to the teacher, I noticed a few things that among all of the verbs, there were only 3 different endings for any of the verbs, AR, ER, or IR. So I chose one of each of those. I chose 3 verbs that I thought would be used very commonly. And when I went back with the teacher, I said, here, tell me which one of these are the present and the future and the past. And I said, I want to know if these are all different. I said, I want to know what the English is right next to them. I said, I'm going to write next to them what the English is. And she was like, that's not really going to help you much. I said, well, I guess I'll find that out for myself. She goes, but really, you don't want to be learning Spanish by trying to translate it to English. And I said, well, maybe I will and maybe I won't, but can you just answer my question? I said, look, I can pay you an extra $5 if you just answer my damn question. You write it down here. I got the English of all the, for example, I eat, you eat, we eat, they eat. And looking at it that way, I could see every time I said we, any verb in that entire book had the same ending to it. Or anytime I said I, right? Almost any verb in that entire book had the same ending to it. And you start seeing these patterns and you make sense of that. I think 10 different people will look at the same information and build a different construct in their mind to make sense of it. But again, it starts with that pattern and recognizing it. And I think to a degree that every language, whether it be something that's completely different from a Latin-based language, say Chinese or Arabic or whatever, I think all of them are going to have patterns that if you can find them, the patterns might not be associated in any way, shape, or form with the patterns of the languages that you know, but leave that to you inside of your own mind to draw the connections. Chinese, for example, I did a presentation about a year ago, and the presentation was about pattern recognition in languages. And everything was put together very quickly. And the day came and I had to give the presentation and I wanted to do an experiment, but my fingers were crossed because I didn't know if the experiment was actually going to work, but I was going to try it with Chinese, which I know nothing about. But for about 5 minutes on one day, about 3 weeks before that, I had gone into Google Translate, English to Chinese or whatever, and just messed around with seeing what the characters looked like for different things. And so in this presentation, pattern recognition is not a methodology for learning a language. It's not like this trick that I can put on YouTube and get 6 million views about, this guy was a guru of language learning because he came up with this new version of learning languages. No, it's just a tool. It's just a tool that you can have at your disposal, just like if you got 36 apps in order to make movies or whatever. It's just a tool. It helps you make sense of randomness. Everything looks random in a language, but you start noticing patterns and things start to make sense. I said, let's take Chinese, for example. I said, if I go here to Google, I said, any one of you, let's say, I don't know, just give me a random word. Somebody says like fire. Okay, so let's put in fire, right? English, you pull up the Chinese and it puts a character. I don't even remember what the character looks like, but it was a character and it had a shape. I said, okay, now I want words for the rest of you. Give me words that have to do with fire, anything associated with fire. So somebody said stove. I said, okay, let's put stove. So you put stove, and of course it comes up with a different character, but you notice that it has that same symbol in the character. Okay, how about volcano, right? So you put volcano. It's a different character, but it has that same symbol in it. And so you learn that you can see certain symbols that have to do with like fiery things, and you can build a pattern out of it that way, which is nothing like how we would make patterns in English or Spanish or whatever. But it was interesting that the characters in Chinese, the symbols that are in them are associated with the relation that they have to certain concepts.
So I was pulling this up. Have you heard of this book?
I can't even see what it says. What does it say?
It's
Odyssey?
called Chinesey.
Oh, Chinesey? No, I haven't heard it.
Yeah, and do you recognize the symbol on the cover?
It might be fire. Yeah. I mean, well, it looks like
Yeah. So what she does in this book, so that's the symbol for fire, and so the book Chinesey it's illustrating exactly what you're saying. It's the patterns in the Chinese language and how symbols build on what the root word is of that thing.
yeah,
And so she'll take it and she'll illustrate it in this really beautiful, characterful way,
yeah,
and then illustrate that other thing that it is, and we'll build off of that, not just with the symbols, but showing the illustrations and the language below it. It's great. Please pick it up. I think you'd love it. And I have it somewhere, and I've only ever flipped through it casually. I've never sat down to like commit it.
yeah.
But she makes the information so accessible that even just browsing it, you'll have one or two things that stick. And I can't imagine if you actually focused on it, just how
Yeah.
digestible that information is. So you're totally right. You're onto something.
Well, it's pattern recognition. What purpose does it serve? Not to master a language, of course, but I would just say it cuts out randomness. And randomness is overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's what kills you when you first start looking at a language. You say, man, it's just so random. I have to memorize everything. And pattern recognition, from the get-go, from the beginning, it cuts all of that in half at least,
Yeah.
And from there, you're still going. So, and adults are very adept at recognizing patterns. It's part of their cognitive ability that they've learned over the years to be able to do. And I believe it's one of their advantages that they have over children learning. Of course, children have their advantages as well. They're far more likely to pronounce a language more native sounding than an adult ever will be. But nonetheless, you're trying to learn a language quickly. That's an advantage that adults have that I think children don't.